What's good, y'all? I recently played a game that everyone's been hyping up, and honestly, they might be right. I'm talking about Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2025. I want to look back real quick on when I made my video talking about the Crew Motorfest. I wasn't very impressed, to say the least. In that video, I explained how these days, most racing games have felt like soulless corporate slop, that they seem to have no direction, no real reason to play. Instead of working your way up to some big boss fight or conclusion, grinding, honing your skills, and building your car up to accomplish that goal, instead, you're stuck in an endless loop of weekly challenges to get the newest DLC car in a game that spoon feeds everything to you. The priority in this game isn't to beat a boss at the end and become the best racer in the city. It's for the companies who make these games to retain as much of a player base as they can for as long as possible, and milk every last dime out of these games. Another thing I explained in my Motorfest video is that I've always been a fan of the Forza franchise. For some time, I was pretty excited when I saw that a new motorsport game was announced, and I was pretty excited for it to come out. Eventually, it did come out, and honestly, I just didn't feel that same spark that I did when I played Motorsport 4 way back then. I think I played it like 3 or 4 times and then just kind of forgot about it. I did play Horizon 5 a ton when it came out, but these days I don't really have much of a reason to play it at all, except for like to cruise around in a car that's only available in that game for like 15 minutes. Here's to hoping that Horizon 6 will be a little different. Grid Legends was another game that I gave a try since I had played the previous Grid games in the past and a few of the Dirt games as well. And I remember having a lot of fun with those and, just being a fan of the Codemasters racing games at the time. But after I finished the story mode in Legends, I didn't really have the motivation to do any of the other game modes and just kind of stopped there. And then there's Need for Speed, and I know this is going to be a crazy take for a lot of people, but I actually like most of the modern Need for Speed games.
You what?
I know for a lot of people that is absolutely mind-blowing since every Need for Speed fan loves to glaze the shit out of Underground 2 and Most Wanted 2005. I'm not saying that those games are bad. I'm just saying that you gotta get their out of your throat.
Damn!
But anyways, I absolutely loved Heat back in 2019, and I honestly think that Unbound was great too. These have been the only racing games in recent years that have kept me playing for like months. But I'm also not going to pretend like this game doesn't have its fair share of corporate slop. It is an EA title after all. One thing that I never understood about modern racing games is the huge selection of clothes and just general amount of character customization that's in them. I get it, it's another aspect of personalization and all that, but this is a racing game where the main focus is driving. I honestly don't give a shit about what my character looks like. And to me, these features feel less like the developers giving you the option to have a completely personalized experience, and more like adding worthless options to loot crates that decrease your chances of getting a prize you'd actually want. Anyways, I'm sorry, that was a huge rant. I'm just trying to get the point across that I feel like most modern racing games are, simply put, boring. Too many times I've decided to give a new game a try, only to have moved on from it a week later. Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown was like the final nail in the coffin for me. I was honestly excited to try it out when I saw it get announced, but then when it fully came out, I saw all the awful reviews talking about how buggy the game is, and saw that the gameplay style is pretty much identical to Horizon and Motorfest. And I figured I should just save my money. But recently, something different happened. Early this year, I was starting to hear some talk about another new racing game that was coming out. And I'll be honest, at the time, I just brushed it off and assumed it was just gonna be another nothing burger racing game and moved on with my life. But then, the unfinished version of the game was released as early access in January, and the reviews followed. Everyone was talking about how amazing this game was, how it's the savior for all the racing game fans out there, and how for a lot of people, it brought back that same feel, that same level of fun, engagement, and excitement that no one's felt in years. That game was Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2025. So with all the attention this game was getting, I figured, okay, fine. I'll check it out. I'll see what everyone else is talking about and see if this game is really what everyone says it is. And not just another mid-indie game that I'll forget about in 3 days. And guys, I gotta be honest. I love this game. I'm jumping on the glaze train with everyone else. This game is awesome. Now you're probably wondering why I'm just now making this video if the game has been out since the beginning of this year. Part of it was just, me being busy with life. But also when I first started playing it, it was in early access like I said, and the game wasn't finished yet. Well, fast forward to now and the full game is out. Now, you know, I'm still a little late with the full release of this game being almost 2 months old at the time of this recording, but better late than never, I suppose. I played this game in its entirety, completing the main story and defeating every racer, boss, and wanderer, and I've put almost 130 hours into this game, so I think it's time I gave my thoughts on it. And if you haven't played the game yourself, maybe this might convince you to give it a try. Now, before diving into it, we do need to give a little bit of backstory on the Tokyo Xtreme Racer series. This game is actually a return from the franchise after being MIA for 20 years. I've actually never played any of the previous games, which sucks because I definitely missed out. But I'm not the only one. It seems like this franchise actually flew under the radar for most people. And that's because it falls into a specific niche of car enthusiasts. These games take inspiration from the very real Japanese underground street racing scene from the 80s and 90s, where drivers would take their Japanese sports cars and battle each other on the Shuto Expressway, the highway system located in Tokyo, Japan. Most kids here in America will play Need for Speed Underground and Midnight Club, which were inspired by the American tuner scene of the late 90s and early 2000s, popularized by a little movie called The Fast and the Furious. For a vast majority of the population, this movie was our introduction into the world of underground street racing. So not a lot of people knew about what was happening overseas, and therefore these games and the developer were much smaller than the mainstream ones at the time. But this didn't matter because these games weren't made to be the most popular or to make the most money. They were made to pay homage to the Shutoku street racing scene. And even though I'm obviously not Japanese and didn't live this life, after playing this game, I'm willing to say that they probably did a damn good job at that. With this game being inspired by the 90s Shotoku street racing scene, of course the gameplay is going to be the same as the real life battles. You drive up to a racer and flash your high beams to start a race, which is a cat and mouse style battle, where instead of reaching a finish line, the goal is to get far enough from your opponent so that the meter on the SP bar at the top here starts to go down. This is essentially a health bar, and when all the health is depleted, that person loses the race. This obviously works the other way around too if you fall too far behind. Now, at first glance, there only being one race mode might make the game seem extremely boring and repetitive, but somehow I never felt this. I think this game was able to strike this perfect balance of smooth, simple gameplay that is also always fun because of a very important trait that this style of gameplay has. It's realistic. Let's be honest. I have never heard of or seen a street racing community where the people race through busy city streets the same way you would in Need for Speed. In real life, most of the street racing you'll see are drag races behind some warehouses or roll races on long stretches of highway. Cruising on the highway and rolling up to someone or someone rolling up to you, flashing their high beams and the race getting on is a much more realistic scenario that I think a lot of car enthusiasts could imagine themselves being in, or have even been in real life. Which is why this very simple, seemingly repetitive gameplay style is still very fun. It's immersive in the sense that it's relatable. At least that's how I see it. The Shuto Expressway is a fun combination of tight corners and long high-speed stretches that, with the right opponent, can definitely deliver some intense and exhilarating races. The C1 loop in particular to me feels almost like if you took a curvy canyon road and just put it right in the middle of the city. And since I mentioned it, I might as well talk about the map for a little bit. This game is technically open world, but you're limited to the expressway, meaning you can't get off the freeway and just, cruise around downtown Tokyo. And again, just like with the seemingly very simple gameplay, this sounds like a bad thing on the surface since these days most people expect an open world game to have a huge map. But honestly, I don't really have any complaints about it. It's fun to drive on, like I said, you get some cool views of a couple of Tokyo landmarks, and honestly, it really isn't that small. It still takes a while to get around the whole map. I'll be honest, that is mostly because you're locked onto the highway itself and you can't get off and on exits on it, which means you're locked onto whatever side of the highway you're on in the direction you're going. When the game was in early access, this honestly kind of sucked because there was only a few ways you could change direction. One is you go back to the garage and exit in the direction you want to go, which would advance time to the next day and can be inconvenient sometimes because certain racers only appear on certain days, which we'll talk about some more later. The other options were to go to either the Hakozaki parking area or Daikoku parking area, since these were the only two PAs that would allow you to exit in either direction, or you could do a long loop around the map. Let's say you were on the northbound side of the center section of the C1 loop here, but you wanted to go to the southbound side without changing directions in the Hakozaki PA. You would have to keep going up and go left onto the outer loop section and go through all that, make your way across the Daiba line to the Bayshore line, past Tatsumi PA, which, by the way, you can only enter going this way, not the other way. Then take the Mukojima line, make a left once you pass Hakozaki, and then you'll finally be on the southbound side of the C1 inner loop. This loop took me like 7.5 minutes to do. Granted, I did have to slow it down for a little because my car started to get kind of warm, which I'll explain later. But still, it's not like this is just a quick and easy thing to do. And that's just for this section. Things get even crazier if you want to do this around another part of the map, or especially if you want to try and hit every PA without ending the day, which I've done before. Thankfully, with the full release of the game, you're able to unlock the ability to fast travel between PAs, which makes getting around way more convenient. Now, I should mention the parking areas since they actually play a pretty crucial role in the gameplay, which means we're also going to have to dive into what this game's story and progression is all about. The game's story follows a similar blueprint as many of the racing games from back then. You're the new kid on the block, a rookie who is new to the scene, and all you want to do is be the best. There is kind of like an overarching theme that gets explained with these cryptic cinematic cutscenes whenever you pass a key moment in the story, talking about how the Shuto Expressway is like this mystical world that seems to call out to people. And it asks us what it is about racing on there that pulls everyone in. Like it's saying that it's not a coincidence that everyone who's there is there, that everyone's there for their own purpose. But I don't know, I just like racing. There's a bunch of teams that all race on the expressway, and you go through each one, taking down each member until the leader of the team challenges you. And once you beat them, the team is defeated. There's also bosses that show up after they've noticed you making some moves, and these are more important to the story progression. To me, the team members and leaders are mostly just there to help you earn money and BP, so that you can make your car fast enough to take on the bosses. There's also the Wanderers. These people aren't in any teams and aren't bosses, but are just much more difficult racers that sometimes will only race you if you met certain conditions. You find out these conditions by talking to people in the parking areas. Drive up to one of these, and here you can do things like tune your car, refill nitrous or change your tires, get a temporary boost for the night from the mechanic if he's there, challenge drivers that might not be cruising around on the expressway, and talk to the many eccentric characters in the game in these RPG or VN style conversations. You can see what's available at each PA by seeing the flashing icons over them on the map. The verses means there's people there that you haven't raced yet, upper battles. The wrenches mean that the mechanic is there, and the white speech bubble means that there are people to talk to. These conversations aren't important to the story, they're just fun and silly little interactions you can have with the characters. And sometimes you might learn a little more about them with these. The important one is the yellow speech bubble. These mean that there is someone there that is offering a vital piece of information. This can either be some backstory related info about a boss, or it can be someone telling you what you need to do in order to race a wanderer. Some wanderers have pretty general requirements, like you need to win 100 races first or drive a certain amount of kilometers or something, but others have more specific requests. Like they only race people who drive the same car as them, they won't race people with nitrous installed, they will only race you if you have a license plate from a specific city, or they only show up on Tuesdays or something. This is pretty cool because it can add some variety to the gameplay. Having to buy a certain car to race someone can kind of be an inconvenience because they're very expensive, and oftentimes you'll need to add some parts to keep up, and it's even worse if it's a car you don't want at all. But generally, I think it kind of keeps things interesting. Hey guys, editing track here. It is currently 1:32 a.m. I am fried. And I don't know if I'm in focus, so I'm sorry if it's not. Before I moved on to the next part, I wanted to jump in real quick and mention a couple things. One, at the end of the day, these wanderers are just side missions. They are not required to complete the story or anything important like that. So, if you don't want to, you don't have to do them. I only did it because I'm a sweat, I guess. I don't know. Another thing, honestly, these are kind of fun because they kind of make you try out a car that you probably wouldn't try, and then you might end up actually falling in love with that car. This happened to me on a couple occasions, but one that was really noticeable was when I had to race this guy that required you to drive a Suzuki Alto. Alto Works. When I first saw this, I just kind of immediately didn't want to get this car. It just isn't something that I would normally ever buy in a racing game. But after throwing some parts on it and, you know, driving it around, I actually ended up liking it a lot. And I still have that car to this day. And it's also the lightest car that I own, so maybe someday, if I can earn enough BP, I might buy the engine swap option and do something crazy with this car. But for now, I actually like it a lot, honestly. So that's honestly another cool thing about these. You know, you might try out a car and you might end up liking it. Bro, this is kind of fun. I like chatting like this. It feels like I'm live stream. Would y'all like me if I live streamed? Yo chat. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sorry, let's get back to the video. You've probably also noticed that these characters tend to have some strange and honestly funny names. It should be pretty obvious by now, but this is very much a small game dev company, and the game was definitely made in Japanese originally. So the English translations for everything can be pretty funny at times. Like north and southbound being called up and downbound, cars just being called machines. And if you want to select a different car in the garage, you need to go on it and click on Riding In. This isn't a complaint or a critique, by the way. I actually kind of like this. It low-key adds character and gives the game a more homemade vibe. Like I'm not just consuming some polished, big-name corporate slop. That's kind of like the gist of the general gameplay though. Let's go back into the garage so we can talk about some other things that goes on outside of the racing. Of course, we need to talk about the cars. Now, like I've mentioned, Tokyo Xtreme Racer is very much primarily a Japanese game centered around Japanese street racing culture. This means that for better or for worse, it doesn't exactly have the biggest or most diverse car list. Everything is Japanese. Everything. No American cars, no German cars, no Italian cars, none of that. Everything you're going to find here is straight JDM. And the list is very small, with there only being 76 cars, along with a few more custom models you can buy after defeating the boss or leader who drives that car. But this is something that I mentioned in the Motorfest video. Most of the racing games will brag about a car roster with almost 1,000 cars and will fill it with slop and other cars that just don't need to be there. I don't buy a ton of cars in racing games. I'd say for me, on average, I'll usually buy around 20 cars and use like 5 to 10 of them the most. So for me, a small list that has a lot of the cars that I already like and use a lot in other games is completely fine. There's even cars in here that you would never find in anything else, like a few K cars, Toyota Chasers, an FJ Cruiser. Hell, there's even a damn minivan. Yes, I'm sure it would be really cool to drive whatever you want on the Shuto Expressway, but you gotta remember, these people were trying to recreate a real life setting. Like it or not, these cars are usually what you would find racing around in Japan. This is just a product of the world they live in. Other than that, visually the cars don't look bad. There's a couple models that do look a little weird, but let's be honest, overall graphically this game ain't anything to write home about. It still definitely gets the job done, plus the actual gameplay itself was more than enough to make me not even think about if the graphics are super realistic or not. The driving physics are definitely very arcade feeling. The cars never experience any wheel spin, and while understeering and a little bit of oversteer is possible, for the most part the game definitely tries to make sure you stay in line. The main focus after all is, of course, grip style racing, so this makes sense, but I also wouldn't mind my car being at least a little tail happy. As a result of that, drifting is really weird and kind of difficult. But if you can pull it off, it can be pretty satisfying, and the game actually rewards you pretty well for it. If you keep racing for the night until all your tires have worn down, it makes it a lot easier to do. Overall though, it's not too bad, and despite this being an arcade racer, changing the setup on your car, like the wheel alignment and the diff strength, actually makes a very noticeable difference in how the car drives. So it's definitely something worth tinkering with on each car. Speaking of tinkering, there's of course plenty of upgrades that can be installed, which can be unlocked over in the perks section. I don't think unlocking parts here is much of an issue, but I will say I think having to unlock cars this way kind of sucks. Especially because if there is a specific car you want that's lower in the tree, you'll have to spend BP to unlock the cars above it first, which can be pretty inconvenient. But we'll come back to all this later. Back to the parts though, there's many of the performance upgrades you would expect, like stuff for the engine, suspension, drivetrain, etc. Customization isn't too bad too. There's a few options for bumpers, hoods, spoilers, and all that for most of the cars. But I will be honest, a lot of these can be hit or miss most of the time, with some of the bumpers looking pretty gross. You can also add underglow to your car and this thing called aura, which is pretty cool. This doesn't actually do anything though, it just gives your car this special effect. There's even a couple options to customize the brake rotors and calipers. The wheel options though are alright. There isn't a whole lot to begin with, and a decent amount of them are kind of mid. But in general, everything along with the pretty good livery editor makes it pretty fun to personalize your car and make it your own. And, you know, me being a stupid stance car enjoyer, I appreciate that the game allows you to lower your car enough and add enough camera to make some pretty good looking stance cars.
Yo, DJ, yes, let me get that beat, baby. Give me that beat. Come on, come on. Face. I could jump behind this motherfucker. I'ma do the race.
Underground Radio.
Feel my motherfucking face.
Now, there's one elephant in the room regarding the cars that I have to mention. The engine sounds are I mean, come on, just listen to this. When I first started playing the game, I attributed this mediocre exhaust sound to my MX-5 having a stock exhaust. But even after upgrading it, it didn't get much better. I'm sorry if you, for some reason, like the car sounds. That's cool, I guess, but personally, I think they definitely leave a lot to be desired. Nonetheless, this is something that I can just easily brush aside, and it's not something that takes away from the overall experience for me. It just would be nice if they were a little better. I want to talk about the whole perk system next because it is a pretty vital part of this game, but I do real quick want to mention this reference tab in the menu. Here you can see things like your highest speed through any of the various speed traps located around the map, and same goes for your best times through segments around the map. What's more interesting is this rival tab. When you defeat a racer, you can come here to see a bit of info about the team they're in, along with a bit more info about the driver themselves and their car. It's pretty cool to come back here to learn some more about the characters, and if you just got done winning a race with an insanely quick car, you can see what their power numbers look like. You can also see any conversations you've had with each racer if you've encountered them at a PA, which is useful if you might need to double check a conversation that might have had some important information. More recently, with the game's full release, an extra option was added called Story Replay. And here you can replay any cutscenes you've already seen, which, I mean, it's pretty cool if you maybe wanted to just see a cutscene again or remember something that was said. Now let's go back to the menu and take a look at the perk section. Whenever you win a race, along with getting money, you also earn BP, which I guess you could kind of think of like skill points of sorts. You can spend that BP here to unlock a variety of different perks, from things that can benefit you in battles to better parts for your car. The first tab, Machine, is where you can unlock new cars to make available for purchase in the dealership. And in tuning, you can make better and more powerful parts available for purchase in the tuning shop. This is definitely going to be the most important tab. I'll talk some more about what the actual racing and opponents during battles are like in a moment, but just know you'll definitely want to have the best possible parts available as soon as you can have them. Over in the driver tab is where you can gain active perks that will affect you only during battles. You're able to unlock up to 3 slots to equip these over in the garage tab, and they can affect a load of different aspects during a race, from things like how powerful your attack is or how strong your defense is, to things like shortening how far your opponent has to be before you start to inflict damage, or having a little bit of your SP restored with every clean corner you take. These are actually pretty important and can have a significant impact on the outcome of the race depending on what your opponent may have equipped. If you have a hard time beating someone, you can equip certain perks that might help you out, so there's definitely an element of strategy when it comes to this stuff. Finally, there's just the straight up perk tab, and these are passive perks that are more just quality of life improvements. You can do things like raise the amount of total money, BP, or cars you can own, get discounts for cars at the dealership, performance and cosmetic parts, or increase the money reward you get from things like near misses or consecutive wins. These help quite a lot with making a lot of money. Back in the early access version of the game, it was actually pretty hard to make a lot of money quickly, and I even had a few strategies that I was going to share that helped me make a lot of money, but with some of these perks in the full release, making money is so much easier that there's really no point in going over those. Oftentimes, when it comes to these skills and perk things in racing games, I feel like they're kind of useless and never really do anything with them. But in this game, they're actually a vital component of the progression. This is partly because a lot of it is basically required to progress, but even the things that aren't all that necessary are very valuable, and I found myself coming back to these extremely often. Alright, so we've basically gone over the whole game at this point, but I want to dive back into the actual racing itself. Like I said, it's fun. I think this game does a pretty good job at making sure every race is at least interesting if you're racing people of your level. I also want to say that the opponent's behavior has definitely improved in the full release of the game. In the early access version, winning races really wasn't that hard most of the time, since the drivers would tend to brake way too much around corners. But now they're not only more aggressive around the corners, but also oftentimes they will deliberately try to block you to keep you from passing, and will usually have a car that is as or more powerful than your car. Like for example, a lot of the bosses that you need to defeat will have parts installed in their car that you haven't even unlocked yet. And to unlock those parts, you need to beat the very opponent that has them. This can seem pretty unfair, but it also means that you actually have to use real driving skill over just straight up power in order to beat certain drivers. I've actually had a pretty damn good amount of very intense and close battles, and on a fair amount of occasions was just barely able to make it out of them. And as I said, the map is just so incredibly fun to drive. That only gets amplified when you're trying to outrun someone that's right on your tail, especially on some of the really twisty sections of the C1 loop. Another really cool feature that was added into the full release was the option to enable extra rules. This makes it so that now your tires wear down not only when you're in a race, but also when you're just cruising around the map, as well as water and oil temperature being added, which will slowly rise as you continually beat on your car, and can eventually cause you to overheat if you let it get too warm. I think this is super cool and have played like this ever since the option was available. It makes the game a little bit more realistic and adds another element of strategy to the driving and how you manage yourself throughout each night. You have to be aware of your tire level and plan if you want to use them while they're still healthy on the twistier sections, and finish them off on the long stretches where it may not matter as much if your tires are worn. And if you want to cough up the money at a PA to change them there, or just go back to the garage and swap them for free, which would end the night and break your win streak if you have a large one. Your engine temps are definitely something you'll have to keep an eye on. Once your water temp reaches the top, you have a little bit more time until the oil starts to rise, and once that overheats, you lose power until the car can cool down again. This can be a race ruiner if a battle goes for longer than you were expecting and you lose power. And this is definitely a much bigger concern if you're doing races on the long, high-speed stretches of the Bay Shore line, where you'll be on the throttle at redline for extended periods of time. I also wanted to point out the cool little intros you get before racing someone. The racers, leaders, wanderers, and bosses all have different little cutscenes and songs that will play before the battle starts, which is a pretty cool touch. And I also must say, while some of these opponents' cosmetic tastes can be different, to say the least, I actually think a lot of the cars look pretty good. And speaking of songs, I will be honest, the soundtrack isn't anything too noteworthy. I like a lot of the music in the menus, with each one having its own track. But when you're driving though, unless you're racing a boss or a wanderer, you'll end up hearing the same 4 songs on repeat. Honestly, I've personally found that just playing my own music in the background while playing this game has given me the best experience. Some of the most fun I've had while playing this game is taking a little bit of silly stuff late at night and locking into some battles with something like this playing in the background. It's moments like that that emphasize something I really love about this game and would explain why I enjoy it so much. It strikes a good balance of being competitive and exciting, making you want to keep racing people and see if you can make it to the next part of the story, or seeing how many consecutive wins you can get before ending the night. But it's also casual enough where the game can still be a fun way to relax and just vibe on a calm, breezy Sunday with the window open and your favorite songs playing. Just thinking about this makes me want to just sit back, throw it on, and cruise the highway looking for fun battles to have, even though I've already beat everyone. It's so funny looking back to the beginning when I was a little skeptical about this game, only to end up being a huge fan that was hooked. I thoroughly enjoyed playing it a lot and don't really have much negative things to say about it. And with the year almost being over, I can confidently say that in my opinion, this is the best racing game of 2025. And could even argue that this is the best racing game in years. And for that, I just gotta say, good job, Genki. Okay, clearly, I love this game. It's funny to think how the 2 videos I've made about a game on this channel so far have managed to be on complete opposite ends in many aspects. The Crew Motorfest on the surface has way more to offer. A bigger map, better graphics, more cars, more game modes, an online community, and plenty of other things. On paper, you would think that a game like that would absolutely sweep something like Tokyo Xtreme Racer. Yet somehow, this is my racing game of the year, while the most I could give Motorfest is a mid. And really, when you look a little deeper and ask what a game like this is trying to do versus what a game from a big corporation is trying to do, like what is their purpose, it starts to make a lot more sense. A key detail about the backstory behind games like Need for Speed or Midnight Club is that these games were made to cash in on the current hype around the tuner scene of the early 2000s. Need for Speed already had a few titles under their belt, which were all games centered around racing high-end exotics that you couldn't modify around these lavish locations. And these games did well enough to get NFS's foot in the door. But once they saw how relatively successful the Fast and the Furious was, they made a complete 180 with Need for Speed Underground, going from high-end exotics racing along the coastline to flashy, in-your-face tuner cars racing in dark, grungy city streets in the night, to try and get in on some of the success. And considering they're still one of the biggest racing game franchises, I'd say it worked out for them. On the opposite end, we have the developer behind Tokyo Xtreme Racer, Genki. These guys didn't care so much about having the biggest franchise out there or making a ton of money. These games were very clearly made by people who actually lived a lifestyle that they loved and were a part of. This game isn't cashing in on whatever current trend is popular. It's an homage to the scene that they grew up in and are truly passionate about, and it shows in all the little details of this game, like how it emphasizes properly setting up your car to handle the expressway or driving cleanly and not hitting anything so your SP doesn't drop. It also shows in the environment. Of course, with this being based off of a real-life location, it's not too difficult to replicate the environment exactly, but man, if you watch videos of people driving on the Shuto Expressway in real life, it's basically one-to-one. I really wanted to point out how they kept the lanes relatively narrow and as close proportionally to the real thing. Games widen streets in the environments because this makes it easier to drive at high speeds, but the downside to this is that the roads feel a little too vast, and you don't get that claustrophobic, close-quarters feel that you would racing in a real urban environment. This game manages to keep keep the highway at a size where it's not too tight and hard to drive, but is also fairly accurate and also gives you more intense, close battles. It's so silly to say this because again, this is a real life location, so this should be obvious, but after playing it for so long and looking for real life videos to add in here, I found it crazy how I was able to recognize each part of the expressway while never even being to Japan or even knowing much about the expressway at all prior to this. Even the traffic itself is extremely accurate, both in what types of vehicles they are, but also the density. Just like how other games make the roads wider to make it easier to drive, they also keep the traffic density low for the same reason. This unfortunately can make the world feel empty and dead oftentimes. I feel like the traffic density in this game has a good balance of making the world feel populated, but not too much where trying to avoid traffic in races is a whole challenge on its own. And again, if you watch IRL videos of Futaka Racing, this is how the traffic is. These people go on here to race at a time of night where they know there won't be a lot of people on the expressway. So even the level of traffic is accurate to the real thing. Hey guys, editing track here, popping in one more time before the video ends. One thing I wanted to mention about the traffic, you can race these people. All of them. Even the trucks. And the craziest thing is, some of these pay out quite a lot. I don't know, just a funny little thing you can do. Anyways, that's it. There's just so many details in this game that perfectly show how much love and attention went into creating the most accurate experience. They weren't trying to make a racing game that was made for the most profit. They were trying to make an authentic experience based on the very real racing scene that they lived. And I think that can be proved even further by the fact that this game doesn't have any microtransactions. Even the DLC boss, which by the way is a collaboration with a very popular Japanese VTuber, was completely free. This game really is something we've all been waiting for. A game that has passion, that has soul, a game that doesn't need to try as hard as it can to convince you to play it by trying to entice you with weekly lottery type events to win an exclusive new car or bundles that will let you have it now along with an exclusive hat for your avatar. This game knows what it is and it knows what it wants to do, and it does it really well. I'm not saying that you need to play this. You can do whatever you want, but if you're thinking about it, it's definitely worth a try. Thank you for watching. All right, see y'all later.